everybody. Thank you very much for coming out tonight to Poor Vote Turnout. Our group has a simple quest that we're on. Our quest is to promote voting by the poor. Promote voting by the poor. And tonight, speaking, I'd like to introduce Linda Dumont from Alberta Street News.
Good evening. I'm going to tell you a bit about the street newspaper because I think that's why I was invited here. I'm going to just give you a little brief rundown of how I got to that point. I was, before 1993, I was not particularly concerned about government on, voting and not voting and stuff. But in 1993, when Ralph Klein came into power, at that time I was a parent on welfare. And when Ralph Klein came into power and he embarked on all those welfare cuts, the first one was he took away the children's recreational allowance, which would allow you to buy your child a new bicycle or skates or things every year. And then about 6 months later, there were drastic cutbacks to the amount of money given to people on welfare for housing. And I was directly impacted by that, so I started writing stories about it. I was, at that time, because I was on social assistance, I was selling a newspaper called Our Voice on the streets in Edmonton, because they don't give you enough money on welfare to meet all of your needs, and especially after the cutbacks. But because I was selling the newspaper already, when the cutbacks came, I was able to survive. Because when you sell a newspaper, you always have, it's like having money in the bank. If you have no food, you can go out and stand in front of a Safeway store, sell enough papers to make money to go, and then go in and buy your groceries for supper. So you've always got that money. Or you run out of laundry soap, you don't have to wait an extra 3 weeks because the welfare checks go away during the first week. And you don't have to wait another 3 weeks till you get your next check. So selling papers provides a poor person what the poor need most, and that's money. Because if they had money, they wouldn't be poor. And so I was selling newspapers, but then there started to be changes in the paper. The paper Our Voice got a new editor. They were deviating away from concern about the poor and more stories of a different slant. And at that time, in 2003, 2 other street newspapers editors got together with me, and we worked out a plan for a new newspaper for Edmonton. And so I started Alberta Street News, which was Edmonton Street News, in 2003. And the paper was self-sustaining for the next 10 years because the sale of papers for 50 cents a copy to the people who are selling them, that created enough money to print the next issue. So it was self-sustaining as long as everybody producing it worked as a volunteer. So I worked as a volunteer on the paper for 10 years. A year after I started the paper, I got together with people and started the Edmonton Street News Society. And so after that I was still doing all the work, but I had to answer to 6 other people. But, and the paper continued that way until this year. This year in August, Marty Shuck Housing, who provide housing for a lot of the people from the streets, made a proposition that they wanted the paper. And they didn't want Edmonton Street News Society, they just wanted me in the paper, me to produce the paper as I had been. And so after negotiations and meetings back and forth, Marty Shuck Housing took over Alberta Street News, and this is the paper, September issue. It says Marty Shuck Takeover. And they started paying me wages. So as of September, I guess I'm no longer living below the poverty line, which is a... Now, how does this all tie in with voting and stuff? I think for a lot of people, when you're poor and you're struggling to survive and stuff, the government is so far removed from you. You're living in day-to-day thing. Because I became concerned about government because I was on welfare and it directly impacted me. And then once I started writing more and more stories and more other people's stories, you know, it became more and more evident just how much government policies affect the poor, and just how much the current situation we have with 2,252 homeless people on our streets, that was created by government policy starting in 1993, when they cut back the allowance, the government funding for affordable housing. So instead of building 20 to 25,000 units of affordable housing per year, since 1993 they've been building something like 2,000 units of affordable housing per year. And the affordable housing that was built before that, like Capital Regional Housing, is starting to get old and needs repairs. So right now, Capital Regional Housing, 1/5 of their units cannot be rented because they're in need of repairs. So we can see how government really impacts, especially the poor. But, you know, over the years with the paper, we've tried to write stories about what's really happening. We've done demonstrations. We've tried to bring awareness to the public about, you know, how government policies and stuff are affecting the poor in our city and in our country and in our province. So this is one of the things we do. So I'm just going to let you ask any questions you want, because there might be something you wanted to ask me as a former vendor and as an editor for the last 11 years. Yes.
I'd like to know, like you've been on the street and you talk to a lot of poor people, like how do you think our group would best go about promoting the idea of voting, like for those people to actually become voters? Because I know that statistics and surveys say that a lot of the poor people don't vote, and I know there's a lot of reasons for that, but what do you think would be our best way to put our efforts, the best direction to put our efforts in?
You know, I really don't have any answer to that. I know that I think the Bissell Centre and Wall Street Co-op, some of the bigger agencies in public, and I think Hope Mission, will allow voters, people who want to vote, to use their address. I think people without an address often don't get on the voters list, so they don't get informed the information. So if we could find some way to make sure that the information about when the election is and about where to vote and stuff was readily available to everybody somehow. You know, rather than some people, if you don't have an address, you're not going to get the information on where to vote, or maybe not even be paying enough attention to know that there's an election coming. You know, not everybody is watching TV and everything all the time.
Or have TVs.
Or has TV, yeah. If they're homeless on the street, obviously they might watch TV once in a while if they go crash at a friend's place or something. But if you don't know about an election, you're not going to vote. And another thing is that, you know, it takes effort to go out and vote. Maybe if people were picked up and driven to voting stations, if there was some transportation available, because if you're at home, especially if you're a handicapped person or something, you have to go out and travel to a voting station, that can be sometimes just seem like just too much work. You know, you're struggling day to day just to survive, and anything extra can be enough to put things over the edge. And having to go out and vote can seem like difficult.
Mm-hmm. Overwhelming.
Yeah. Yes.
What's the circulation of Alberta Street News?
We print 3,000 copies every month. You estimate that we only sell about 2,000 to 2,500, 2,700, depending on the month. And then you estimate that each paper is read by 2 persons when it's sold. So.
How well read is it amongst the poor in Edmonton?
Not as well as it should be. We need to, and I was hoping that that Marty Shook would get on the ball with trying to get more vendors, but the they haven't really seemed to have done much yet. So we do need to have a vendor drive to get more than
Is there any other paper or publication that is it in any way the voice of the poor in Edmonton? Would your paper be it, or is there another one?
I don't, not that I know of, but it's possible that there is, but I think, you know, as far as I know, since 2010, we've been in Calgary as well, because Calgary also dropped their street newspaper in 2010. And the reason the Bristol Centre and Cups in Calgary dropped production of the paper is because for their programs on, you know, fetal alcohol syndrome and all their social services programs, they get matching government grants, dollar for dollar. They pay half and government pays half. Whereas for a newspaper, it's very difficult to get government funding, and they couldn't get grants for the newspaper. It all came out of their donations money. And this is why both the Bristol Centre and Cups in Calgary dropped the production of newspapers. It's all about money.
What kind of stories are they covering lately?
We have about half the stories are actually written by vendors or people who are poor or telling their stories, and the other half are like about, a lot of it is things related to homelessness and poverty and stuff. Like in the upcoming issue, we have a story about, you know, it's illegal to feed people on the street in Edmonton.
It's
Really?
Unless you have a licensed kitchen to prepare your food, and you have a big heated,
commercial kitchen.
commercial kitchen, and you have to keep your soup or whatever it is hot with a heating element while you're out serving. Then you can serve it.
Wow.
You know,
When
things
did
like
that happen? Is that a recent?
I don't know if it's recent, but it's being more enforced now, because since after the House of Refuge burned down, the health board was out there just every second day to make sure they weren't feeding people
What is the
anything
house?
other than House of Refuge mission was an inner city mission that served soup and sandwiches daily.
Was that on 95th Street?
Yeah. But now all that they can do now is hand out food from the food bank, which is non-perishable, and distressed items that they pick up at a Sobeys store. If you look at the government regulations, it's illegal to feed people on the street. Like, you can't just go out and make a bunch of sandwiches, stand there and hand them out. That's illegal, because you could poison them, because it's not unless it's prepared in a registered kitchen. And it's illegal to sleep if you're homeless, unless you're sleeping in a shelter. You can't just go sleeping. Like, in November, they cleaned up 400 camps in the River Valley. You know, and you know, if you go to the library, they might let you sleep there, no more tolerant there. But if you go to downtown to the mall or something, you fall asleep, you get kicked out right away. And anywhere you go, it's okay to sit there and do things there, but as soon as you fall asleep, you get kicked out.
Sounds like the health department stuff, though, right? On the food.
Yeah, health department's very concerned about the food, but they've become much more concerned about the food downtown since they're rebuilding the neighborhood. They've got that Boyle Renaissance program, and they're upgrading the whole neighborhood. And as soon as you start doing upgrades to a neighborhood, the poor are no longer wanted in that neighborhood. And so anything that's encouraging poor people to be in the neighborhood has to be discouraged as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right.
So you don't want.
Sorry, just a couple things, comments on what you said earlier.
Yeah.
So I'm with a group called Council of Canadians.
Pardon?
I'm with a group called Council of Canadians,
Uh-huh.
and
Maud Barlow?
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I've written about her speeches quite a bit.
okay, I'm glad you like her, but somewhat one of the mandates of the council is social equality, but more environmental, really. But I went to the AGM in Hamilton in October, and there was quite a bit of talk there amongst union people in particular about something called the basic living wage.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with this?
Yeah,
And how
I
this is
think-
being proposed that everybody should have a
Right.
basic living wage. So it's something I don't remember much about. I took some notes, but are you familiar with this?
Yeah, I think they've estimated that in Alberta it's somewhere around $19 an hour, basic living wage to get all your needs met from your income in Alberta working a 40-hour week.
$19 an hour,
Something like that, yeah.
right? And that's-
18 or something, or 19, yeah. And our minimum wage is, what, 11?
Not quite.
Not quite yet, so.
You know, other than that, you know, we are running a campaign towards the federal election this year on democracy in general. And one of the things that we're trying to do, that we have what's called a Get Out the Vote campaign. So I'm just throwing that out to you right now. It's part of the reason I came, but also because I know Brian. But you know, maybe we can connect somehow and you know, help with that.
Well, I can certainly do a story on it. I don't know.
And,
Read it, but most of the people who read the newspaper or who buy the newspaper are already concerned. So we're preaching to the choir with the newspaper.
okay, well, we'll maybe talk more.
Yeah.
But
Any
do
questions?
you have any other vendors, or how many vendors are there?
There's only about 35 right now.
And do those vendors get together very often? or-
No, there's 6 of them in Calgary and the rest in Edmonton. I found that trying to get vendors together, I've tried having pizza dinners and vendor meetings and stuff, and there's just 2 or 3 show up and the rest just don't bother. I don't know, it just seems very hard to get them to come out to anything, even Christmas parties.
They're
Some of
busy,
them-
aren't they?
Huh?
They're busy, aren't they?
Well, they're busy, and like the ones that are homeless might not really know what day it is, so they don't really, because when every day is sort of the same, you know, you can lose track of the date or what day it is. And some of them have addictions, some of them have, you see, we're providing employment for people who are unemployable by reason of addictions or illness or circumstances or disabilities. You know, we have vendors in wheelchairs, we have people with addictions, we have people with mental illness. And because you can, even if you're 99% disabled, you have that little window of time when you're feeling good enough, so you can go out and work then. So maybe you only sell papers 5 hours a week or 2 hours a week, but it's still a job, and it gives people pride in themselves. They're proud of their jobs. They're proud to say, I'm an Alberta Street newspaper. I went to the funeral of one who passed away, and right there on the funeral display they had her badge, because it was something that she was there, that meant a lot to her, that she was somebody. She wasn't just, nobody. She was somebody. She was a vendor. So it gives them a sense of community as well, which is really important for people.
How have you covered elections in the past?
Not as well as we should. Maybe you guys could help with that.
We sent you some articles.
We need somebody to do, like, it would be nice, I think, to have a full-page spread with the candidates and what they're doing. Here, or something.
Like, what do you think, what would be an issue in the next federal election that would affect the poor, as you would say, or the
Well, anything to do with housing, I think, with
housing?
dollars.
Because there used to be, because what kind of federal housing programming has there been, or is there any more federal programming?
I think it was pretty well derailed in 1993 and never put back together.
Yeah. Because there, of course, there was the
Yeah.
CMHC had a housing program,
Yeah.
a co-op housing program.
But it's not sufficient right now. We can see, if you think back to 10 years ago in Edmonton, you didn't see homeless people lying on the streets all over, like you do now. I remember going to San Francisco for a conference in 2002, and there were homeless people with little shelters and stuff on the streets there, and come back to Edmonton, you didn't see it. But then 10 years later, it's the same as San Francisco. They've got their little makeshift shelters and stuff by the Bissell Center and the back alleys downtown.
And my aunt, she had a little, she's getting old, and she's starting to kind of forget things, and she forgot where she parked her car. The other day downtown on 2nd Ave, or there it was. So she actually contacted my dad. They went driving around looking for it, midnight, 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
And she said, there were people standing on the street on 102nd Ave.
Oh, yeah.
Like, obviously, with no place to go.
you know, it's hard to care about voting when you're concerned about survival. I think survival takes precedence over everything else, and that's probably one of the problems we face with poor voter turnout, people who are maybe most in need of getting voices heard.
Yeah. Well, sorry, I guess maybe we can follow this. Like, so do you attribute some of this, what you saw, to just meaner, more right-wing government attitudes?
Oh, yeah. Like,
whether it's federally or provincially?
oh, yeah. Like, when Ralph Klein came into power, he completely, as I said, he completely derailed our welfare system and made it to all this Alberta Works. I mean, come on. You're going there because you can't work and you have no job, and they say Alberta Works. It's like, you know, it's like, oh, what's wrong with you, Alberta Works? And I went to a conference in Denver, and I told them that our social services was called Alberta Works, and they thought I was making a nasty joke. You know, so, well, really, I mean, it's you know, things like that. It's all these things. I mean, they've made it harder and harder for people to get assistance, and they finally, with Redford, they increased the welfare rates a little bit, but they're still, like mother and child, I think it's something like $1,000 a month. It's not very much.
So it's more at the provincial level, though, that
Yeah.
you think, you know, the provincial government is more of a problem than the federal.
Social services is a provincial.
Yeah, social services is a provincial thing.
But housing.
Housing was federal and provincial. The provinces put in so much, and federal put in so much.
Income tax is federal,
Income tax is federal.
and so,
In terms of credits.
Yeah.
well, the rich don't pay the tax, corporations don't pay the tax.
No, because there's so many loopholes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, there's another.
But you know, if you look at it, like the Council of Canadians and Mongarno and all their speeches, you know, she said that the government leaders are just the spokespersons for the huge corporations.
Yeah.
That it's actually the large corporations that are running the world, and that's where we are.
Not much profit
It's all about money, right?
in low income housing.
Linda, thank you so much for coming out.
Okay.
Missed you the last time.
Yeah, well.
That's all right.
Yeah, all those crazy streets there. I could not find a place. I couldn't figure out how to get off those freeways without having a major accident.
But I've long admired you, and I love your newspaper, and congratulations on being recognised recently.
Oh, yeah.
Well deserved. Apart from Peter Goldberry, are there any politicians who show an interest in street news?
No, not at present. You know, Peter Goldberg, a funny thing was, remember he wrote that book on housing? At the time when he was writing that book on housing, I was the editor of the Dumont Calling News. And we spent hours with him talking to me about all the different housing units and stuff. We got a lot of that information right from him. Which I thought was kind of amusing. So then he gave me a free copy of his book.
Does he pay for his regular advert in the street news?
Yes, he does.
Oh, good.
And he's been paying the whole time. And he's one politician that actually has come out to these big dinners we put on for the poor downtown and served meals and stuff.
Uh-huh.
I don't know about his party, but, you know,
He's an
as a
interesting
person,
character.
he's an interesting man.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions before I depart? Just sit
Well,
down.
it's not really a question, it's, thank you very much for everything you've done. You're a hero.
Yeah.
No, I haven't done anything, but you see, most of what I've done, I did probably, well, as I was saying, I did it because I was able to, you know, street newspapers are a phenomenon of the 90s, and I think that's because the climate, the political climate stuff made it necessary for it. And so we've got street newspapers around the world now.
Yeah.
And I know personally how much selling a street newspaper, how much of a difference it can make in your life. And so when I was no longer, you know, so I even sold Alberta Street News after I became editor. I just quit selling it not too long ago because it's a great job. And the neat part of the job is you don't have to declare your income because it's all donations, and the people have paid taxes on that money already. So. But you know, we're self-employed, right? So we could deduct our clothes we wore and everything while we were selling papers, we could deduct everything, so come on, right off.
Good, play the game.